Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast.
Hello, my name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 175. People who live in both the secular world in America and other places, and the world that attends the Christian church every Sunday, like clockwork, are equally struggling in our current era with theology. The American journalist and blogger many years ago, Andrew Breitbart, many years ago, infamously quipped that, quote, "Politics is downstream from culture." But on this podcast, we hold more to an expansion of that maxim, that politics is actually downstream from theology. Or, if you are more of a secular mindset, the term would be worldview. What a person believes in or doesn't believe in impacts how a person does everything. Thoughts and beliefs precede actions. I can know what you believe with some relative certainty by watching what you do. But the question is not, can I know what you believe? The question is, quite frankly, do you know what you believe? And if challenged, questioned, or confronted, can you mount a defense, an apologetic, if you will, of your beliefs? The sad fact of our current era is that many people, secular and Christian alike, do not know what they believe, and even fewer can mount a robust defense of such beliefs if they are challenged, confronted, or questioned. And this is not a problem that is, quote unquote, solving itself with people's access to more information via the internet. Instead, collectively, we seem to be opting, secular and Christian alike, to sticking to the platforms, the influencers, and the ideas we know, without taking the time to burst our cognitive and emotional bubbles and go to neighborhoods where there might be people who might not agree. Theology, the study of the headwaters of reality itself, has always presented challenges for the thinking and the unthinking, the serious, the unserious, the agnostic, and even the believer. And so today, in this episode of the podcast, we will address themes from a book listed 25 years ago as one of the 100 Christian books that changed the century by William J. Peterson and Randy Peterson. We'll be looking at the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Leaders, we are deeply enmeshed in an era where not only are leadership decisions being questioned, but also the very fact of leadership itself is on trial. And today, we will be joined in our final episode of this, I believe it's our 4th season of the show. We will be joined today by Christen Blair Horne, rejoining us from episode number 165. So look at that, 10 episodes later, she's back. Hi, Christen. How you doing?
Hello. I'm well. How are you?
Good.
Good
So
to be here.
We've moved from science fiction into this.
Right.
So I don't.
And very two different worldviews.
Oh, radically different.
Right.
Radically different worldviews. Like H.G. Wells and then C.S. Lewis. Forget it. Those two guys couldn't even have a conversation. But they knew they couldn't have a conversation. And so it was going to be very polite. But it was going to be very formalized because they were both English. It's going to be very formalized. They were going to have stiff upper lips and all that. And then they were going to get the hell out of there.
But at least they'd be civil.
Right, exactly. They could
be in the same room.
Right.
They'd be civil.
Right. It's like the eliding of the civil society, which I did just see something very briefly before I came onto the show before we started talking. Somebody was writing something about Gen Zers not owing saying that they don't owe anything to anybody, and thus they don't have to be like polite or something like that. Like that's a thing now. I didn't know that was a thing.
Okay.
And that's fine, except
an interesting perspective.
Right. Except that when you take that perspective, then okay, now the rules of social norming have all like shifted. And so I'm free then to download on you, and then you can't cry. Or like call me names or anything. Like, because now we're in this whole like weird like thing of man against man and all against all. It's very Hobbesian.
Very interesting.
Very, very like man, not even man in the arena, because that was a positive thing from Teddy Roosevelt. It's very much like a gladiator match, and like all of life can't be a gladiator match, which I think C.S. Lewis would probably agree with that.
Right.
Okay. So we've got this book. We've got this thing here, Mere Christianity. We had our open there. We did not do an intro episode on Mere Christianity. And we will be revisiting C.S. Lewis's books. He's one of the folks who I've been sort of not really hesitant. That's not really the term. I sort of want to treat with the respect due the material. But I also want to, because he wrote so much, I want to take the time to like actually figure out what the things are that we want to discuss. And so in a couple of years, we'll do the Screw Tape Letters. I will probably screwed my courage to the post enough to do that one. And I keep wandering around in vicious circles at hideous strength. His science fiction was not that good. It just wasn't, Clive. I'm sorry.
You could do Chronicles of Narnia.
And then that's the other thing. So like if we do Chronicles of Narnia, though, I got to do it before that Netflix thing drops, whatever abomination that's going to be.
Well, or around that time, that could work.
Yeah, because the lion is the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like I've always said that, like when they were doing the movie a few years ago, many years ago now.
Yeah.
I remember the old, and I told my kids this, and they didn't believe me that it was a thing. But remember the old Chronicles of Narnia show that was on PBS? And like
I did not watch that one, but my husband did.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So like I watched that when I was a kid on the random Sunday afternoon on PBS when we actually had the television on,
right?
Which was kind of amazing,
right?
And like the lion looked like, quite frankly, trash. Not to put too fine a point on it.
Is a potato sack painted orange?
It wasn't Jim Henson.
Hay for the main.
It wasn't Jim Henson's workshop. They weren't hiring that guy. It was PBS. I was like, well, we can't get Jim Henson. We can get the intern down the street. And so, and I read Chronicles of Narnia all the way up to I believe I tapped out at the Silver Chair when I was a kid. Now my son and my daughters all have read all of the books, which is kind of amazing, through no help of my own. Well, I shouldn't say through no help. Like I read like my youngest boy, he's 8. So when he was like 7, he went through all of them in like a year. Like we bought him like the big volume or whatever. And my wife started reading them and my daughter started reading them to him. And then I was like, well, I have no idea what's going on in any of these books, so I'm just going to read it, and I'll just move the narrative along for you. And I would always tell him, I have no idea what's happening in this book right now. And he's like, yeah, I know. You have no idea. Just read. Just shut up and dance. Shut up and dance, Dad. I don't want to hear your problems. But we did get to the end of all the books. So he's done the whole series.
Yeah.
And then the movies are interesting. They're an interesting phenomenon because, again, you got the lion right, but then I don't think anything else worked after that.
They did. Yeah, I felt like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was done very well. And then did they do Prince Caspian next, which was atrocious. And then they did Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which was my favorite. That's my favorite book. Also atrocious because they had lost Disney's money. So, yeah. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was the only one they did well.
Well, and now you got that what's her name who did the Barbie movie, Gerwig or whatever.
Oh,
Greta
okay.
Gerwig. She's the one that's involved with the Netflix show. I have no hope. I have no faith. Like, I heard her name was attached to it, and I was like, oh no, this is going to be
This
is going to be nonsense.
I just don't. I don't know. I don't know anything about Greta. But if you're not, I almost feel like if you're not willing to take this material I'm trying to figure out how to say this. If you're not willing to acknowledge the beliefs that are so clearly underpinning this fantastical children's story, and you're not willing to keep those in your representation of this material, don't do it.
Right.
It would be like taking an Islam folktale and trying to take all of the Islam faith out of it so that you could secularize it. Like, don't do that either. Don't do that.
I'm gonna make the point that Bill Maher would make. If a Westerner did that, well, okay, so the reason Westerners won't take all the Muslim pieces out of an Islamic tale and will bend over backwards to make sure that Islamic tale is actually told in an Islamic in a manner that honors the Islamic culture is because Salman Rushdie had a fatwa put on his head for writing a book that tried to do that. And by the way, people have tried to actually kill him. And so creatives will bend over backwards because Islam, well, as a religion, believes that if you don't bend over backwards, we will kill you. Whereas Christians stopped killing people for not bending over backward represented Christianity probably about 300 years ago. We pretty much knocked that off. Like, we're pretty much done with that. Now, don't get me wrong. People will kill in the name of Christ, and people will still kill people for whatever. But at a mass level, like, no, Greta Gerwig is not worried for as much as she may say, and I'm sure she hasn't said anything. I'm sure Netflix has put a gag on her like nobody's business. But I'm sure that if she were ever interviewed, she would never actually be worried about some radical pastor coming and actually blowing her up, because we stopped doing that as a religious entity body right about 300 years ago. We just knocked that off. Islam, say what you will, continues to do that for a whole variety of reasons that we don't need to get into. Now, Christen didn't say any of that. I said that. And if you want to come for me, that's fine. It's my show. But this is the facts. And by the way, I'm not the first person to point this out. As I preface my entire commentary there, Bill Maher has also made the exact same point. So go bother him. That's why. So they're going to strip all the stuff out. Glenn Close or what's her name? One of those older actors is going to be the voice of the lion or whatever.
Did they confirm this going to be female?
Yeah, it's going to be that. Yeah, it's going to be her.
Okay, I love Glenn Close, but
to your point, it doesn't honor the source material.
No, it doesn't. It reminds me of, this was actually, I don't know how long ago it was, but they made a movie about Tolkien. It's supposed to be like a sort of biopic sort of thing. And I was like, no, there's no way that they're going to actually honor Tolkien's like beliefs and his history, and they're just going to talk about the war and they're going to secularize it completely. Like, the man was deeply Catholic, and that's completely, like, Lord of the Rings is riddled with it. You just can't get away from it. So anything. I also have no, long story short, I also have no faith in this new iteration of C.S. Lewis's work, which is why you should cover it, because there's totally, if you think, and this is why I think what's it called? Chronicles of Narnia is actually good children's stories, is because it doesn't talk down to them.
Right. Yeah.
And adults are still gleaning and learning so much from these stories. Like I have no doubts whatsoever that once we start reading it to my daughter and my children, that we'll be like, I forgot this was in there. Like, oh my gosh, can you believe that? That's right there.
Yeah.
You just
well, and well, okay, so that goes into our first question here, which is like, what do you know about mere Christianity, right? So C.S. Lewis wrote a lot, as I said in the opening, there. And he wrote a lot in a lot of different genres because he had a lot of different interests. He was multifaceted in that sort of way with his talent. It was like mercury. It's spread all over the floor.
And a linguist, right? Is that what he taught at Was it Oxford?
So again, I did not go into the background of him. I probably should have gone a little bit in there. I do know that Tolkien was a linguist and a philologist.
Tolkien for sure was a linguist, yeah.
Yes. But as far as Lewis goes, and you can look that up while I'm rambling incoherently here. It's fine. I do need to get one of those Joe Rogan setups where we like bring the screen in with like the details. I do need to get that and then like flip between the two while we're actually recording live. I do need to do that.
Okay. Yeah. English literature at Oxford.
There you go. English literature. Right. And so an Oxford guy, by the way, H.G. Wells would have respected the whole Oxford thing because that would have been English class, so.
Lewis was Irish. He was born in Ireland.
Well,
okay. Anyway, sorry.
I mean, part of the United Kingdom. Sorry. I mean, I know y'all fought like a lot, and you held it against English for a long time, but still, like, you got to understand. For all the rest of us out here, we don't know the difference. It's tragic, but we don't know the difference. We know that you like have like an Irish lilt or a Scottish brogue or whatever, but that's about as much as we're Americans.
Well, I don't know. I know that Irish, if you're speaking English with your like normal Scottish brogue or Irish lilt, you can't understand the English. I know that much.
Did you ever see the movie? Did you ever see the movie Trainspotting?
No.
Go watch that movie. There's a great sequence in there with Ewan McGregor. Talking about the Scottish and the English while they're like walking around outside trying to get fresh air because they're drug addicts. So they don't care about fresh air. It's like walking around. They're heroin addicts just walking
God.
outside trying to get fresh air.
Okay.
There's a whole rant that he goes on about like other people hate the English. I don't, because they're just wankers. We were colonized by wankers. Like, come on. We're Scotland, for God's sakes. So I think there's a lot of that in that sort of part of the world that goes along with that. But I don't necessarily think, back to Lewis, I don't necessarily think that he held that, against the English. I mean, clearly he didn't. He went to Oxford. Like, he can't.
Yeah. I don't know how culturally Irish he was.
Right. Yeah. So,
but yeah, I guess back to the question, as for how much I know about, or what I know about mere Christianity. Yeah. I grew up, I was, born and raised Protestant. We were non-denominational. And so I always kind of knew about mere Christianity, but I actually never read it. I remember we read it as a church. But then again, I'm sure my youth group did something, did a sermon series or something about it, but I didn't actually get to read it. My copy is my dad's.
Oh.
And he bought it. Oh my gosh, the stupid camera's not working. Anyway.
Oh, there it is.
It's my dad's. Oh, was it there?
It was a little bit there, yeah.
Come on. Anyway, it's my dad's. And it has like the name of our church on it, and it was for $10. And I was like, what the heck? This is crazy. So it has some of his notes and questions in there. So I thought that was funny. Other than that, what I know is that, and I always held it kind of on a pedestal of like how remarkable it was and how amazing it was and how clear and very clear and helpful. But this is actually the first time I've read it. And then mine has a foreword again that was talking about how originally it was delivered as a series of talks. And I think I had heard that before over the radio.
Yep.
Right after the war?
During the war, actually,
during World War II.
Yeah, 1942, I believe,
so
is
when
when
he's talking about
yeah.
the war in the past, he's talking about World War One, which was even more devastating for English than World War II was.
Correct.
Which is
if you can imagine that.
insane to think about.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, one of my music professors was one of the first people to tell me that World War One basically eradicated a generation of Englishmen.
So we just covered a whole bunch of books around war and warfare and war making. We just came off of that on this in this season. And one of the books that we covered was John Keegan, the English historian. He wrote a book called The First World War. And one of the points that he makes, and it's a 1-volume sort of gallop through the First World War. The casualty numbers, if you ever read that book, are insane. Yep. The British Expeditionary Force lost 60,000 men at the Somme at one battle. 60,000 guys. And this is because of a combination of the machine gun, barbed wire. They weren't using gas quite just yet at the first Battle of the Somme. The second Battle of the Somme they did, but not the first one. So it was a combination of sort of the trench warfare, the embedding of the Germans in the cliffs and in the trenches on the Western Front. And then the belief that had been held by a certain class of people in Europe overall, but in England in particular, that in order to be successful, one must honor one's commitments, even to the point of death. And so C.S. Lewis was part of that. Tolkien, who we just mentioned, was part of that. Both those guys saw things in the trenches of World War One that, to paraphrase from No Country for Old Men, it made an impression on them. Sure as hell did. And along with Ernest Hemingway, we covered A Farewell to Arms. And it was a generation, you're right, it was a generation of young men who just didn't quite know where to put all that. And then 20 years later, to see it all come back around in the form of somebody else who had also been a messenger between trenches in Germany, where the death rate for being a messenger was like 90%. And somehow Hitler made it. And to see that guy was the guy who made it, and just kind of be like, and by the way, that's why Churchill, a lot of people on the alt-right now, this is one other pin. I'm going to put my pin in this argument for next year. But a lot of people on the alt-right now are like yelling about Churchill basically being the worst person in World War II, Right. Tucker Carlson et al. Y'all need to shut up. I don't care. I do not care. I don't care what conclusions you come to from Churchill's decisions. Dave Rubin, Tucker Carlson, all you guys, all of you. Churchill was at a number of different battles, including Gallipoli. So was Hitler at a number of different battles on the Western Front. So were a lot of other guys that eventually became big boys later on during World War II, including Harry Truman, by the way. Charles de Gaulle was in World War I. All of these guys all saw the war up close, and they knew exactly what it meant to have a war. So I don't want to hear from Dave Rubin, who's never shot anybody in his life, or this entire generation. Now we're into 3 or 4 generations, actually, of grown men that have never actually picked up a gun or stood a post, about how horrible those guys were and the decisions that they made. So that's my rant. That's it. But it drives you crazy because you go back and read the actual history of World War I, and it is probably the most documented war other than World War II that we know anything about. And the documentation is clear. I mean, people wrote stuff down. Like, we could actually go back and read what they said. And it was amazingly traumatic. So yes, to your point about C.S. Lewis, yeah, when the BBC asked him to go on the radio to kind of calm folks down, he was more than willing to do that because he was too old to go march and stand opposed, but he knew what it actually meant to go to war.
He was serving again, though. He was helping something with the Air Force. I remember reading. I think it was in my forward or something.
Yep, he was doing what we call it, air patrol,
Yeah.
civil air patrol, because he was too old to go. He was too old to go to the front.
Right.
But yeah, 60,000 guys at the Somme in one battle. Just insane. Things we would never tolerate now. Never. By the way, just as a comparison, over the course of 20 years between Afghanistan and Iraq, I think we lost 8,000 soldiers total in 20 years. And I'm not saying those lives weren't valuable. I am merely saying that in comparison to what we lost in the past, we got away with quite a bit. And partially that's due to technology, better tactics, better learning, better training, One of the books we covered was Sebastian Junger's book that he wrote called War, about the guys in the Korangal Valley in 2007 and 2000, between 2007 and 2009 in Afghanistan. We lost 50 guys in the Korangal Valley, and we killed countless numbers of Taliban fighters who they were shoveling into the Korangal Valley, a valley that the British never went into when they were trying to take over Afghanistan. They didn't even go in there. The Russians lost 2 helicopters in there, and they were like, nope, we're not going in there, back in the early 80s. And the Americans looked at the Korangal Valley and went, oh yeah, we'll go in there. It's fine. And we lost 50 guys in 2 years. That's the American mindset. That's the American military mindset. That's what it is. That's where we're at now.
Our military is insane.
Like, just
not insane. I mean,
yeah.
The amount of funding and effort and energy, and
you still have an 18-year-old guy on a 50 cal that can disassemble and reassemble a 50 caliber, machine gun.
Yeah.
In the middle of a firefight.
Yeah.
Which is, again, training, material, equipment are just better than they were.
Yeah.
And so we kind of, I mean, you can kind of whatever, apples to apples, but in an apples comparison of death to death.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, C.S. Lewis would have loved to have had those numbers. He'd been like, what are we? Okay, 8,000 people? That's a cakewalk. Not to put too fine a point on it. And everybody hates that term. Yeah. You know, I don't want to talk too much about war because that's not where we're going here today. But like, everybody hates that term. George Bush probably shouldn't have used it in talking about Iraq. I don't think our political leaders should use those terms in referring to war. I think we should always make it as serious as possible.
Yeah.
And we should also understand that just like everything else in the world, warfare has advanced.
What's interesting to me is you get somebody like C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist, who saw the horrors of World War I up close, lived them, came out, saw another war that was shaping up to be about as horrific, if not more, like when you think about the consequences of the...
Yeah, because the entire civilian front opened up. Yeah.
And you see him driven deeper and deeper into faith instead of away from faith, because I feel like a lot of secular stories are like, if you experience what C.S. Lewis experienced, that's when people lose faith, right? They're driven the other way. Yes. And C.S. Lewis is this great logical thinker. And admittedly, when I was reading this book, I was like, man, I do not feel smart. I feel like he's just going, there were so many then this follows, and this follows, and this follows. And after about the second this follows, I was like, I think I'm still following. I'm fairly intelligent. I think maybe I've started to question that. I think it all makes sense, but it is very clear and logical. But man, it's just he discusses this at such a higher level than so much of the masses today that are like our current modern level. It feels like it has fallen so much. Granted, again, he was a professor at Oxford, and that's always been like kind of the top of the top, even of English at his time. English culture at his time, but
Right.
yeah. Anyway, so that's an interesting.
Well, and you talked about how you got to him from Protestantism. So
Yeah.
I was born and raised Catholic, Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic. Uh, I won't say the Catholics have no truck with C.S. Lewis, but I will say that the Catholics will claim Reinhold Niebuhr and G.K. Chesterton as the two sort of really mountainous, apologetic theologians of the 20th century, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Chesterton, interestingly enough, who also did know H.G. Wells, by the way, and used to argue with him all the time.
Right.
Chesterton writes from much more of a sort of rumpled acerbic wit kind of perspective, which, to your point about Lewis being an Oxford educated, not Oxford educated, but an Oxford professor, and coming up in the English class system, Chesterton was so like totally like over here with all of that. And so the ways in which, and I think this is something that you see, by the way, in Tolkien, in Lord of the Rings, interesting enough with Tolkien. So Tolkien has the Catholicism, but he also has the class system, the English class system embedded on top of all of that. And that makes for an interesting mix, like with the Hobbits and with, Aragorn and how he talks about like his majesty, or how he addresses, the evil in Mordor and all these other sort of elements. By the way, we're also reading Lord of the Rings. I'm also reading Lord of the Rings with my boy. So like we just read Sam just found Frodo at the top of the Tower of Cirith Ungol. We're going to Mount Doom. We're headed around the corner now.
Yeah.
So, and we just came off a bad negotiation with with the Assembly from Sauron. He kind of, as I told my 8-year-old, I said, well, that was significantly less of a positive interaction than he thought he was going to have with Gandalf. Don't worry, you'll see the movie soon.
Right.
You'll see it. Let me give you the book first.
yeah, right.
But again, you sort of see it in the way that Tolkien describes the English countryside and those sort of elements. You see the battle happening between those two, whereas Chesterton sort of goes away from that in the opposite direction. Is like, no, we're just going to go fully into the Catholicism, and then to a certain degree, Lewis, and this is why I think Catholics don't really, at least not until the late 20th century, didn't really get their arms around C.S. Lewis. He seems to Protestant.
He's pretty overtly Anglican. But I really appreciated how he opened it up, because I'm Catholic now. I was born and raised Protestant, and I went to a Christian college, was Nazarene, and I actually had a Bible professor who my dad was, I think now that I have converted, he's softened a little bit on Catholics, but when I was growing up, he was very anti-Catholic. And it was actually a Bible professor.
Did he call you a papist? He didn't say papist.
Not. No, he has never called me a name. My dad is very
good. Because I did hear that. I did hear that. I have actually heard that before. But anyway, go ahead.
No. So yeah, I had a Nazarene Bible professor who, we were doing a Christian tradition class, so getting into the history of the early church and all that, and he was actually the Catholics, that there's a lot more merit here than a lot of Protestants will give them credit for. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But anyway, so all that
1,000 years of Western history were held together by these people. Just like we gotta give them something.
And so oh my gosh, this is getting really into like Christian culture theology. I have a personal friend who is still Protestant. I guess their church has like a missionary movement to convert Catholics, and I was like, we're Christians too.
No, it's okay.
And my friend was like, yeah, I know. I was telling them, it's like they still follow the Nicene Creed, and I was like, we wrote the Nicene Creed. What are you talking about? But anyway, all that to say, I really appreciated when I was reading through the book, C.S. Lewis is Anglican. I knew that. I knew he was besties with Tolkien, who's Catholic. I was like, I doubt he's going to start picking fights.
No.
And I really appreciated how even-handed he was, even with all the disagreements. And there's a question, if we get to it, there's a question down below. We're talking about, but he like what are the important things or something like that. Like, and I just really appreciated how he was like, hey, don't waste time arguing about all the little. There are some little nitpicky differences here that don't matter. And I remember like Protestant, they'll say like, is this a salvation issue?
Yeah.
That's like the big question.
Yes.
Right. And so what I appreciated is that I feel like C.S. Lewis sticks to the absolute core of like, this is what every Christian believes. This is probably, I mean, actually, I think there are some Protestants that would read this and be like, we don't believe that anymore. Like there's certain like little things in here. Not little things, actually. They're not little, but
they're not salvation issues. So calm down.
Well, but they might be. I don't know. Anyway.
But this is where you wind up.
He's not attacking. It's so clear that he's not attacking anybody. He's like, here, this is the thing as I see it. If you want to believe it, cool. There's even a couple of things in there where he gets real deep into the theology. He's like, if this isn't useful for you,
right,
skip it.
Just skip it. Exactly. Yes. Which I do admire that.
Good, down to earth Christian. Without knowing this. You don't need to know that God, like the particulars of God being outside of time.
Right.
And if that hurts your brain, which I used to watch Doctor Who, so that's kind of thinking like, I'm like, oh, fun. But for some people, they're just like, that hurts. I'm not going to think about that. It's like, okay, fine. No, you don't have to.
So let me pick up from laws of nature, the law of human nature. So because this goes directly to what you're talking about here. And then I want to jump into like Christians in America, because we're gonna talk about some intramural fights here. We're gonna get into some intramural fights. Here we go. Now this law, by the way, this is from Mere Christianity, the Law of Human Nature. By the way, you can get this. There's publicly available copies floating around throughout the entire internet. You can go grab a copy if you want to read this. All right, and I quote from Lewis. Now this law or rule about right and wrong used to be called the law of nature. Pause. Yes, throughout the entire Enlightenment, from Thomas Jefferson all the way to freaking David Hume, they all knew about the law of nature. The agnostics, the skeptics, the believers, they all knew about law of nature. And Lewis is pulling on something that's a deeply European, pre-Enlightenment idea. Okay, back to the book. Nowadays, when we talk of the laws of nature, we usually mean things like gravitation or heredity or the laws of chemistry. But when the older thinkers called the law of right and wrong the law of nature, they really meant the law of human nature. The idea was that just as bodies are governed by the law of gravitation and organisms by biological laws, so the creature called man also had his law, with this great difference that a body could not choose whether it obeyed the law of gravitation or not, but a man could choose either to obey the law of human nature or to disobey it. We may put this in another way. Each man is at every moment subjected to several different sets of law, but there is only one of these which he is free to disobey. As a body, he is subjected to gravitation and cannot disobey it. If you leave him unsupported in midair, he has no more choice about falling than a stone has. As an organism, he is subjected to various biological laws which he cannot disobey any more than an animal can. That is, he cannot disobey those laws which he shares with other things, but the law which is peculiar to his human nature, the law he does not share with animals or vegetables or inorganic things, is the one he can disobey if he chooses. This law was called the law of nature because people thought that everyone knew it by nature and did not need to be taught it. They did not mean, of course, that you might not find an odd individual here or there who did not know it, just as you find a few people who are colorblind or have no ear for tune. But taking the race as a whole, they thought that the human idea of decent behavior was obvious to everyone. And I believe they were right. If they were not, then all the things we said about the war, meaning World War I, were nonsense. What was the sense in saying the enemy were in the wrong unless right is a real thing? which, now he's switching to World War II, which the Nazis at bottom knew as well as we did and ought to have practiced. If they had had no notion of what we meant by right, then, though we might still have had to fight them, we could no more have blamed them for that than for the color of their hair. I know that some people say the idea of a law of nature or decent behavior known to all men is unsound because different civilizations at different ages have had quite different moralities, but this is not true. Oh, look at that. There have been differences between their moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. That right there, that entire paragraph I read right there, paragraph and a half, or 2 paragraphs actually, that sums up, no, that presents a challenge to the secular worldview of relativism, which we are now wallowing in the West.
Yeah.
I would even go far beyond wallowing. We have drowned in relativism. And it also puts paid the idea of individuality, which Americans in particular, is if countries are to have sins, America's particular sin is not pride of nation. That ain't that. Every country's got that. America's particular sin is individuality. The idea that we can decide which laws of nature we are going to follow, and no one can tell us what to do. Right. Lewis would object to all of that. And he would say that that is foolish and would lead to the death of a civilization. And he might be correct about that. Where this is important, I think, for Christians, now let's get to intramural fights, because we have a lot of intramural fights. At least I see intramural fights. So on the internet between Christians. So the various Christian accounts I follow, the various intramural fights I see that secular people never see. It's very interesting to me because I interview a lot of different people on this show. I have a lot of different conversations with a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds on this show. Some of whom are more agnostic or atheistic in their worldview, some of whom may be more Christian, but we've never actually had the opportunity to talk about that. And then others of whom are just like, I don't know, I'm floating through the world. Okay. And it's interesting when I talk to the people who are in those last few categories, the agnostic, the skeptic, floating through the world. When we touch on, as we invariably do, either the Bible or theology, which invariably we will, because we are talking about human beings and, as I said in the opening, reality, how you think about reality really does matter. When I talk with those people, what is interesting and what pops up is when I talk about the intramural fights that Christians are having with each other in America right now, the people, as a matter of fact, I just had this conversation with John Hill, interestingly enough, another guest of ours, on our episode about war, because you can't talk about war without talking about religion. You can't. And I was talking a little bit about some of the intramural fights, and he was like, I didn't know that any of that was going on in the world of Christianity. It's like, well, no, because you're not in the thing. It's also not spread out throughout our culture in the way that it was even like 30 years ago, even before that, 50 years ago. So like you went to Nazarene College, right? That entire system of Christian based learning and Christian colleges and universities has been totally and completely, from a Christian's perspective, infiltrated by secular people at all levels. I read a book. I have a book actually that my wife got me, where a person, whoever the author was, researched what the actual beliefs are of folks who are teaching and who are deans and who are administrators at Christian colleges, and then the kinds of people that they are graduating from, not just Christian colleges, but also seminaries, who are then going to serve in churches. And the number of those people who hold beliefs that are closer to those of the secular world than are those that are closer to a religious worldview is well over 50%. It's overwhelming. And so they are going to these congregations where the vast majority of people in the congregations still hold worldviews that are more biblically based. And this is part of the collapse, internal collapse of the American Christian church that has been going on in a slow motion collapse ever since Rick Warren stopped being relevant at the end of the 90s. And I say that, and then you smile because you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, my dad led the purpose-driven movement at our church
All those
when I was
seeker
growing up.
sensitive people.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Don't get me started on the seeker sensitive movement. And please don't ask me anything about Billy Graham or about any of or the Jesus Revolution. Don't ask me about anything about any of that. Because again, it's intramural fights. It's intramural fights. And the reason why there's intramural fights, it took me a while to sort of understand this, is because Christians in America, for those of you who are not Christian and who are listening to this, or maybe listening internationally and have no idea about any of this, there's just a little education, and then I'm going to ask Christen a core question here, and we can sort of get going. So there's 5 groups of people, 5 divisions, I would say, of not only Christians in America, but I think this applies to other religions as well. And I got this, interestingly enough, I got to give credit where credit is due. I got this from the guys who host the Bema podcast, which was on from like 2017 to like probably 2022, and was part of the Hebrew roots movement that is occurring in, or was occurring at the time, in the American Christian church. And basically the Hebrew roots movement was an attempt by certain Christians in the American church to return or take the church back to the Old Testament understanding of who Jesus was, and to acknowledge Jesus's Judaism, and to try to understand Jesus through a Judaic lens, and also to try to understand Paul and the other apostles through a Judaic lens, which is closer to what the kind of Christianity that Peter would have advocated for in Jerusalem versus what Paul was advocating when he went to Corinth and the rest of the Gentiles. Okay. And again, that's another intramural fight. I'm not going to get deep into that. But the podcast that I got this idea from is the Bema podcast. If you're interested in the Hebrew roots movement, go listen to it. It will frustrate you, by the way, if you are a Christian, just fair warning, depending upon how deep you are into your own theology and your own understanding of the text. It will kind of drive you crazy, both in a good way and a bad way. Anyway, so what are these divisions? So the divisions include, there's 5 divisions. So you have the Herodians, right? And these are people who, in the American Christian church, in the context of the American Christian church, they really like the things of this world, and they're looking to syncretize, that means join the world and Christ. They're the people who go to the non-denominational churches and sing the Bethel songs and have the iPhones and the devotionals, and they think they're doing fine. Those would be the Herodians or the Herodian types. Then you have the Sadducees. Sadducees are folks who really like worldly power and influence, and they like the way that Christianity sort of affords them that. In the American Christian church, the Sadducees will show up as Joel Osteen. That's who I think of, or Kenneth Copeland. And you can come for me about all of that if you would like. Then you have the Pharisees in the American Christian church. By the way, this is the one that everybody, believer and non-believer alike, hates. But there's something important to value in the Pharisaical sort of worldview. Pharisees really like the New Testament, and they really like arguing over what it means. They really like arguing over who's in and who's out of the church in capital letters and in air quotes. And they will use the other types, and they will unite with the Herodians and the Sadducees and the Essenes and the Zealots. They'll unite with all those other types to pursue their goals. So when you think about Pharisaical folks, think about every big Eva church you've ever seen, every big Eva megachurch you've ever seen. Those churches are filled with folks that would be defined as Pharisaical. By the way, not only by people outside the church, but as I said before, people also inside the church. These would traditionally be like your church lady types. You're going to follow the rules because I know the rules. Now, the thing is, and this is a point that I want to make that was also made on the Bema podcast, and I think it's relevant to this. Pharisaical types, no, Pharisees. Jesus hung out with the Pharisees, and he argued with the Pharisees, and they didn't touch him not one bit. He hung out for a week with the Sadducees, and he was dead. Important thing to understand. And the reason Jesus hung out with the Pharisees, and by the way, he said this in the red letter parts of the Bible, of your New Testament, you have everything but mercy. The church ladies have everything. They have the law. They have the word. Some of them know the word better even than I do. They know the hermeneutics and they know how to argue the apologetics, but they don't have the mercy. That's the thing that Jesus wanted to get to the Pharisees and the Pharisaical mindset that the Pharisaical mindset tends to miss. Okay. Then your last two types are sort of minority types in the American church, but they are still here. You got the Essenes, and those are the folks that really like being away from all this worldly crap, and they look anxiously to the end of the material world. Think of like Tim LaHaye and the Left Behind people. It's those kind of people. The people who are consumed with whether or not they're post-millennial, amillennial, dispensationalist, preterist. They're very consumed with what is happening in the book of Revelations. They're always trying to tie the book of Revelations to things that are happening in current headlines, because the reason why is because they want Elon Musk and his humanoid robots and all the secular atheist people to get in their ships, their SpaceX rocket ships, and fly away. That way they can inherit the earth. That's what they want. They just desperately want them to all leave, because they can't make a person who is in the mindset of a scene can't shake hands with a secular person. They can't. They don't know how to do it. Think about every survivalist type you've ever had who's like storing gold or guns or gasoline. It's those kind of people. And by the way, how do I know? I grew up with those kinds of people. I know exactly who those people are. I understand exactly their mindset. And I have a lot of empathy, by the way, for those people, because they are the ones actually that write down all of the things that happened, and they're the ones that document the history. So when the world blows up, they're the ones that get the last word, because they're the ones who wrote it down. The final group of folks you have in the American church is the Zealots. And the Zealots, by the way, Jesus had a few zealots around him, Simon the Zealot and some others. Zealots really like pushing Christianity onto others. They really like pushing Christianity onto fellow believers and unbelievers alike. The Zealots can be, and they will make, allies with all of the other types as well. They're not like the Essenes. They don't want to go off in the mountains. They just really have a lot of passion, a lot of zeal for the word. And they are the people who will sit in the coffee shop. They're the guy that will sit in the coffee shop nursing a cup of coffee, and he would have a sign that would say, "Come and talk to me about Jesus." And he'll talk to you about Jesus all day. Matter of fact, he'll walk down the street, talk to you about Jesus. Matter of fact, when you tell him to go away, he'll still talk to you about Jesus. That's the zealot type. So these are the 5 types you have in the American Christian church, updated for modern sensibilities. And Lewis's writing appeals to all these groups and really has something for all of them, I think. The way in which he writes secures the power of belief in Christ within a framework that each type will accept. There's something here for people who are more of the Herodian, iPhone types, and the Sadducees types, and the Pharisaical types, and the Essene types, and even the Zealot types. And Lewis also understands something fundamental, and I think this is at the core of mere Christianity, and this is probably our whole conversation right here. But he understands that these folks are the material that God has to work with in building the kingdom of heaven, yes, here on earth. And by the way, in Genesis, God said it was good. And I know that's tough for us as humans because we put all of our stuff and we project all of our stuff onto all these types. And God created them all. God allowed space for all of them. And God said that it was what? Good. So this frames some of the ways I see the themes in mere Christianity, this thinking. Christen, this is the first time I'm laying this framing on other people. So congratulations, you're getting the brunt of all of this.
Yeah.
What do you think of this framing? I was watching your face as I was going through this. And it's okay to disagree. That's fine. I mean, please disagree. Please tell me I'm off my rocker completely.
Well, I don't know if this is a millennial thing, but I'm definitely one of those people that is like, ooh, it's like a personality test. Which one am I? And I'm reading these and I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe my husband could tell me. I don't know. Like
this is your what's your American American church type?
One of the
BuzzFeed
one of the friends
article
that I actually followed into the Catholic Church. I just every time you said the American church, I kept hearing him because he actually does a lot of apologetics. And I will say,
Mhm.
you know, your intro was talking about how a lot of modern Christians can't really handle apologetics. I'm one of those people. I'm working on it. You know, now in my 30s after being born and raised a Christian. But unfortunately, I felt like my role model was not great. Um, but so I'm working on it. But I'm one of those people that gets really defensive and emotional almost
Mhm.
immediately something is challenged. So I'm having to unlearn that. But my friend, back to my friend who, you know, does now apologetics, Catholic apologetics, as also someone who converted from Protestantism. He's like, there is no American church. We're too busy fighting with each other. There's
I mean, he might have a point there.
there's no unity. There's no
There's no
unity.
unity. Yeah, there's no
There's
unity.
no unity in the American church. It's just all
Well, so give him these two ideas. There's two ideas because my wife and I have been talking a lot about this because we're in the middle of a church search, right?
Mm.
And that's a whole kind of thing.
It's hard.
It's very difficult.
My
It's
family
very
was
difficult.
all but excommunicated from my home, but the church that I grew up in, and took a long time,
Right.
especially because of all the I hesitate to call it drama because it's very painful. It was a very
Hmm.
painful break. And the family definitely felt like we were wronged,
Yeah.
and pushed out of this place that was my home.
Right.
So many of my formative experiences, where I met my husband,
Hmm.
where I got married. So it just,
Hmm.
when we were forced out. And so it
Hmm.
was very difficult to find, or when we were looking, just
Hmm.
even to want to find a new church, because then it was just an opportunity for someone to do that again.
Well,
Um,
and that gets to sort of the three things that I would say to your friend. Um, the reason we don't have an American church, there's really only three reasons. One, geography. Geography is the big thing.
we're just too damn big.
Correct. And that ties into number two, which is individuality. Remember, I said, American sin
Yeah,
is individuality. I don't need this community. And this is where geography then kicks in. So I can
yeah.
pack up my wife and kids in my Conestoga wagon, say I saw something in some plates in a mountain that no one else can see, and I'm just going to go right there. I'm going to screw off to Nebraska, and you're not going to find me, and I can get 12 other people around me, and congratulations, now I have a community, and I don't need anybody. And by the way, not minimizing Mormonism, and it's almost the entire history of Mormonism. Well, think about it. Think about it. The last truly revolutionary religious attempt was Scientology by L. Ron Hubbard. And the only reason that worked is because California was far enough away from people who would have check-jacked L. Ron Hubbard, and even people did then, but would have stopped that thing and strangled it in its cradle. But because we're so big,
Yep.
geography sort of mucks us up. So it's geography, individuality, and then the other thing is this is the third thing that everybody misses, believer and unbeliever alike. When you have religious liberty and you actually take that seriously,
Yeah, right.
there you go. Dot, dot, dot. There's the ellipsis.
Yeah.
I know millennials don't like the ellipsis. I probably shouldn't have left it that way. But like that. Like that's the thing. Like anything will fill in those dot, dot, dots. From everything from the NVIDIA cult to the Branch Davidians in Waco in the 1990s. Like that's going to get filled in there because who's to say? We've decided to take religious liberty to its radical end.
Yeah.
Now, I would push back on your friend and I would say, as the big evangelical churches break up in America, and this is in the other part here that we're going to talk about, as the big evangelical churches break up in America, I do think that we are at a point where we don't need an American church, but I do think we will get in the next 100 years, and it might take 150 if we're around as a polity that long. But I think we're going to get a uniquely American theology. That I think we will absolutely get. I think we are groping our way towards that.
For better or worse, I suppose. With
I mean,
considering what the American culture idolizes.
Correct.
An American theology may or may not be a good thing.
Well, so Jonathan Edwards, the great theologian, Sermons in the Hand of the Angry God, who died at like 49 of like a mysterious disease, he was groping towards that back in the 18th century, because he was even seeing it then, and there were only like 100 and some odd years, not even 100 and some odd years, 75 to 80 years outside of the Puritans. Like there were still people walking around who could remember when the Puritans first showed up, and by the time Jonathan Edwards came along and was born, the fracturing was already starting. And Jonathan Edwards was like, we got to get a hold of this.
Right.
And we can't do it from a European perspective, because the problems that are in Europe are not the problems here.
Right.
And so it's interesting, to your point, C.S. Lewis, Irish, came out of a long culture of European Christianity. But if you go out and Google the great American theologians, let's just stick to the 20th century, great American theologians of the 20th century, you get R.C. Sproul. And I'm not knocking R.C. Sproul. R.C. Sproul was a giant. I mean, my God, like ridiculous. But I mean, after that, you go all the way to the 19th century.
Mm.
So I think not the American church necessarily, to your friend's point, there's too many intramural fights going on right now. But I think the American culture needs a theology that comes from someone in the American church.
Mm.
And I don't know who that will be. I don't know who the someone is.
A unifier.
Well, I always think of the scene in Braveheart when all the Scottish lords are like yelling over their titles and they're waving their papers around. And then the big guy that was with Mel Gibson in there picks up the axe and slams it in the table. And he's like, shut up. We're all just going to unite. We need the guy who's the big guy who's going to slam the axe in the table in the American church and say, we're shut up. We're all going to unite.
Mm.
And in the mid 20th century, the person who sort of had that most weight was Billy Graham.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, there were people who were opposed to Billy Graham because they looked at what he was doing and they went, yeah, you saved a stadium like 70,000 people, maybe. But like, to what end?
Mm.
Like, what are you doing there? That was Rushdoony and all the guys from his right, political right, but his theological right, who were like, no, you're foolish. And he ignored all those guys because he was big enough to ignore all of them, but they didn't. I mean, they were publishing and they were writing and they were putting down books and they were saying, like, this is not sustainable. This is not what you do to like build a functioning theology in America.
Right.
I also think that we don't have a theology, and this gets into some of the other things, but we don't have a theology that actually addresses the cultural problems we have in America. We just don't have it. Like what is the biblical application for? Okay, here's an easy one. We were talking about marriage, right? And Lewis addresses marriage in here. Great, not a problem. If you've been married more than 5 to 10 years, Lewis will absolutely be helpful for you. The chapters on Christian marriage and sexual morality, all that stuff will be absolutely helpful for you. If you are between 18 and 34 and you are in college, none of those chapters will make sense. And maybe I shouldn't say make sense. Maybe I should say they won't encourage you to go out and make better choices on Tinder. Which is, by the way, where the Herodian Gen Zers are. They're on Tinder. Trying to find a mate.
Right.
Right. Who they could be married to because they saw the human biological drive, the law of nature drive to be married.
Right.
And the thing that God put in them to be married.
Right.
But the tool they have is Tinder. And there's no theology around that.
Well, what's interesting is that even though, C.S. Lewis doesn't pick any fights.
No, he does not.
Has like you said, something for every kind of what did you call them? 5 types. Every type of Christian. There are still things that he lays down, and he's like, "This is what we believe as Christians," and one of those is, "Till death do us part." And
yes,
the
that's right.
American church doesn't agree on that anymore either. So and from my perspective, that's one of the issues. That's one of the reasons American theology doesn't have answers for the issues of Americans' culture, is because we can't agree. We don't. The American church does not agree till death do us part.
Right.
And he got into and part of this, you could think about it like, the Anglican Church is very close to the Catholic Church.
Yep.
It was just like the king wanted to get divorced. And so they was like, right, here's my own church. And it was like, but you can keep believing basically the same thing. But we're going to try to kill all the Catholics later. But it's fine.
Yeah. Later on. But then we'll put that aside for a second.
But anyway, just the history. So anyway, he gets into, the Christian belief is that, man, wife, one person, and tearing them apart is like ripping a person in half, and you don't do that.
Sure. Yep.
And churches don't teach that anymore.
So,
and they you probably feel like you can't. And I get it, because my mom got divorced. Like, her husband cheated on her and abusing her, but and so that's one of those, like, okay, if the belief is no divorce, and the man is unfaithful and the man is abusive,
but there is a theological answer to that. There's a biblical response. There's a biblical response to that, right?
There is, but it's difficult. It's harder, and
it's so much easier. The tragedy.
Like, I get it. But this is why American theology doesn't have an answer.
The tragedy that you would be a pastor that had to say something difficult, and half your congregation might walk out.
But hey, son, you're making my point.
I know.
This is why the American church has no answers, because they don't want to teach anything that's hard.
So, no, I think the American church has. I think the American church has no. I think the American church has no answers, because they don't. And just like in all areas, I mean, we talk about leadership on this podcast. Just like in all areas that are impacted by leadership, it is a failure of leadership, which fundamentally means it is a failure of courage. So here's the thing: if you are willing to be unliked, so I'm going to name a person here who I believe has stated those things from his church, because he stated those things on his YouTube channel, his blogs, every podcast you will actually get him on. He was just on with Sam Harris and said a bunch of the same things that he's been saying for the last 30 years. He went into debates with Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and the other new atheists way back in the year 2000, and defended himself successfully and defended Christianity and apologetics. And by the way, he's from the right of Billy Graham, Doug Wilson. So if you go Google Doug Wilson and you look at him, he comes out of a specific Reformed, Presbyterian, Calvinistic line that believes that men are the head of the household, that when divorce does occur, it can only occur for a very narrow, specific number of things, that marriage is for life, that both men and women have sins that are specific to them and their gender. And that it's not just men that need to change, but also women that need to change. And by the way, he also believes that if we're actually going to be a nation that actually is going to put Christian ideals into our documents, it might be a good idea, kind of, to actually acknowledge that Jesus is Lord. And he is not popular. He is not well liked. He scares the hell out of everybody, from progressive, secular, leftist, Marxist, communists, all the way to your point, the squishy pastors in big evangelical churches that won't say anything. And he has his own books. He started his own school, St. Andrew's College. He's done things in his community in Idaho. And now in his 70s, he's getting more play because Pete Hegeseth joined his church, who's the current Secretary of War, not Defense, War. And he is being put into all of these spaces now. And people are, of course, clutching their pearls. But the problem is you can go back to 30 years on his blog post, and he's been saying basically the same thing and publishing the same thing since the mid-1990s. He hasn't changed his tune one bit. You may not like the tune. You may disagree with the tune, but he's saying the things. And by the way, there have been people in his church that have gotten divorced. There have been people in his church who have suffered abuse at the hands of spouses, and he has dealt with that underneath church discipline. And some of those people have come out and have spoken. Others have kept their mouths shut. It's individualized, right? Because we live in America. So there are those kinds of people floating around. There are those, but you have to be willing to be not liked. You have to be willing to like. I think he started his church back in the mid 70s, and it took him 50 years to get here. What big evangelical church leader do you know that runs a mega church in the state in which you are in who'd be willing to wait 50 years and grow?
Well,
I mean, John MacArthur maybe, and he just died in California. I mean, he was big, and he was big enough, by the way, when COVID-19 came along to tell Gavin Newsom to go pound sand, which was kind of amazing because most church people, most big evangelical churches were more afraid of the people leaving than they were telling the civic government, no, you stay in your spot, Caesar, which is, by the way, is a constant question for us on this podcast. When we get to this part of our year, who tells Caesar to sit down? And that's got to be also a core of American theology, I would assert, is there has to be an idea in there that Caesar takes a second seat to God. And right now we don't have that. We have the church and the state together. People like to talk a lot about separation of church and state, da-da-da-da. Stop. We have church in the state and the state in the church. And actually, I would say more state in the church with all that goes along with that. So you do have those kinds of folks, but they're very tiny. They're very tiny minority. And by the way, they don't get invited to conferences, and the polite people don't like talking to them.
Well, one of the reasons I had trouble parsing your question was like, which pastor of a mega church? And be like, well, hold on. You almost have to stop because the idea of a mega church implies money. A lot of it.
It implies Sadducees, doesn't it?
You don't get a lot of money by being unpopular.
Well, you can, but it takes a long time.
It takes a long time. So, yeah.
And so I don't. American church, maybe 500 years from now, if America's still around. But American theology, a way of contemplating reality. I think that's an easier get.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair, making that distinction. But then something else that I was thinking about, because this guy that you were talking about, this one pastor who now has been put into the spotlight.
Yeah, Doug Wilson.
It reminds me, it almost like the question in my head was like, okay, how do you say all of these unpopular things and not be one of the people that's picking a fight? It's like, well, that's easy. Like you stand by what you believe, you say all these things. Mm-hmm. And then to C.S. Lewis's point, you just don't go pick a fight. You don't go at people.
No.
You act still in love and, you behave the way Jesus told you to.
The challenge that we also have in America, though, is freedom of speech. So if the
reactions to freedom of speech, it's almost now like, oh, correct. If you exercise your freedom of speech, you're attacking me. And it's like, no.
Right. So if I say there will be some people, might not be this year, might not be next year, might be 10 years from now, who will listen to my show, will find this episode, and will think that I have said something that is incendiary or hurtful. By the way, I'm more than prepared for that. That's one of the reasons why we don't have sponsors on this show, and I find other ways to make money around this show. Now, one of two things will happen at that point. Either it will be buried by the algorithm, or it will be resurrected by people looking for a problem. And then they will come to me and they will start in with me. Now, I'm from Gen X. I'm the later end of Gen X. So my attitude is always, I said what I said, I didn't stutter. Like, I don't know what you want. Do you want me to apologize? I'm not doing that. Oh, you're going to try to take away like food out of my mouth or whatever. Good. Okay, well, to paraphrase from the hostages in Taken to Liam Neeson, well, good luck. There's more than one way to make money in this world. There's more than one way to do something. And if I haven't said anything that is, to our point earlier, a salvation issue or a sin issue, if I've merely stated reality as it is, you don't like that I put it in that way, that's really not, as my daddy would say, a me problem. That's really a you problem. And you might want to go off and trundle off and go deal with that. And the internet world we live in now, which is, again, the reason why we need an American theology, the theological framework that existed for the last 2,000 years in the West has struggles when everybody can have a voice and radical free speech is the thing. Because radical free speech, sure, doesn't mean radical freedom from consequences. I'm not talking about that. What radical free speech means is that people have to decide, to our point about civility earlier, right, that we made way earlier in the show. What it means is we have to choose what to be civil about and what to not be civil about. And so Doug Wilson went on Sam Harris's podcast. Now, I know Sam Harris. I don't mean no personally. But I know who that guy is. I know atheism inside and out. I've heard all the arguments. I've looked at all of the assertions, and I know what the counter arguments are to atheism. And I've listened to the Richard Dawkins and the Daniel Dennett's and the Sam Harrises and the Christopher Hitchens of the world, and all of their little acolytes running around on the internet. And at the end of the day, atheism is for fools. Sorry, I'm not sorry. No, I said what I said. I'm a Gen Xer. No, I'm not sorry. It's for fools. You're foolish.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, not sorry. Actually, not sorry at all. There's no mealy mouth about any of this. I want to be very clear. I'm not sorry. Atheism is for fools.
Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
But guess what? You can go very far being foolish. So I'm not going to get in your way. You can go very far, make a lot of money, have a lot of influence being foolish. There's a lot of people who do. I struggle with, of course, my only thought is, I hope that you have a really good explanation for your foolishness when you get to wherever it is your ineffable soul is going. That's my only caution. But I'm not an evangelical type. I'm not going to try to convince you, because the evidence is already here You've got everybody from C.S. Lewis to the church fathers. And if you won't even, as Paul would say, if you won't even listen to them, why would you listen to me? So I'm not here to evangelize. I'm here to, yes, dismiss you as foolish. I know your arguments. You don't need to come and convince me or persuade. Move on. But Doug Wilson is evangelical. And so he's going to go on Sam Harris's podcast and he's going to say everything that he would normally say. And Sam Harris is going to make the faces that he makes with his nonverbal, skepticism. And then I'm going to look and I shouldn't, but I'm going to look at the YouTube comments below that interview. And I'm going to see all of the people with weak theology, weak worldview, no worldview, a differing worldview, or a confused worldview pop out like all of the legion of demons on Twitter. And they're just going to come out. And we don't have, again, a theological proposition for how to deal with that communication interaction. And that's where I think a uniquely American perspective would be helpful. Because how do you forgive people who are, how do you forgive dumpyman45@gmail.com who said something hurtful, below, some video you posted? Like, what's the theological framework for dealing with Flavor Girl 55 that posted a Nazi meme underneath your comment? Right. Like, how the church the American church has no theology for how to deal with that. And I don't see it getting better because AI allows you to do all of this and more at scale.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say American theology might be a better, easier get. As far as the church that will come out of that, I would hope it wouldn't be the church of Elon Musk's robot.
I would also hope that.
But I think we're still going to have those same 5 divisions. We're still going to have the Herodians and the Sadducees and the Essenes and the Zealots and the Pharisees. But where their theology will be warped, that will be the challenge. But we're still going to have those same 5 types. We're still going to have the people who love the world and they love the fight and they love the technology and they love the Tinder, to go back to the Gen Zer for just a minute. And we're going to have the pharisaical, Karens, crazy Karens, who will be, stripped of the theology, but will have all of the need to correct. Because that didn't go away. It just needed to be funneled in a particular direction, right?
Right.
We'll still have the Essene types who will be your genuine believers who will want to go hide in the mountains. And of course, you will have your zealous types who will be incredibly passionate about you coming to the church of Elon Musk because they believe they found the key, they found the thing, the Gnostic secret knowledge that has been hidden from us. By the way, those people are also conspiracy theorists, by the way, on the internet. That's also those people the Venn diagram overlaps. All those folks, right? They're the ones who are going to ask you, when did you sell out to Big Pharma if they ever have to go to therapy? Those people. And God bless them, by the way. We need those people. And then you also, of course, will have your Sadducees. And big is going to be a different thing, I think, in the next 50 to 100 years. Big isn't going to be a megachurch with 3,000 people every Sunday. I don't think that model is going to survive. I think that model is breaking up in real time. And that's part of the other chaos that we're experiencing right now. I don't know how big your church is, but the churches that I've been looking at for my family are between 150 to 300 people max. As you can't build relationships with anybody beyond, Dunbar's number, beyond 100 people.
Yeah. The parish that we go to is probably one of the bigger ones in San Diego, but even then, it's definitely not 3,000 people. But even with the number, even 100 to 300 people, it's hard to build relationships. So
it is
a point of making sure, hey, let's get small groups.
Let's get you into small groups. Let's get you into home groups. And I think that model on a 300 and lower, kind of level works.
Yeah.
and part of the collapse of big evangelical is just like the collapse of everything else big that came out of the 20th century. Mass media, mass industry, mass whatever, mass church, all of that has collapsed in the last 25 years. And that's the other part of the chaos that we're in right now. So again, your friend can listen to this entire little segment here, and then he can feel free to contact me, and we'll have a conversation.
I'm sure you guys would have a fascinating conversation, and I want to listen to it.
Okay, back to the book for just a moment. I want to take a moment and talk about a little bit about the structure of the book. So the book is divided up and does come from C.S. Lewis's recorded radio broadcast talks that were done in the 1940s. And book one talks about right and wrong as a clue to the meaning of the universe. Then we have what Christians believe in book two. Then we have book three, which is Christian behavior, which covers things like morality, cardinal virtues, social morality, forgiveness, hope, faith, charity. And then we have a fourth book, which is Beyond Personality, or the first steps in the doctrine of the Trinity. Now, if you've never heard of the doctrine of the Trinity, let me sort of lay this on you. So Christians believe, fundamentally, I believe this, that the Godhead, God as whether you decide to describe God as an existential entity with no body, which, okay, or you decide to describe God as a person walking around, okay? Christians hold to the belief in a triune God. This is what separates Christians from Muslims. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Or Jews, where there is no God but Yahweh, period, full stop. And he's had multiple prophets, and other kinds of people wanted to work with him. Okay. So Jews and Muslims and Christians are all part of the big three monotheistic religions. Where Christianity separates from Islam and Judaism is Christianity makes a bold claim. Christianity claims that God not only created the earth, but that God stepped into history and stepped into creation and stepped into the material world in the form of, and we're recording this right around the time of Christmas, in the form of the baby Jesus in the manger. And that Jesus lived a life where he experienced or was tempted by everything that man was tempted by, and experienced everything that man experienced. Died, was crucified, died, was buried in a tomb, and 3 days later was resurrected in fulfillment of the scripture, as they say in the Catholic Mass. And that upon his ascent into heaven, by the way, bodily, wrap your brain around that, the Holy Spirit was then sent down as a comforter, spoken of specifically in Matthew 24, but was sent as a comforter. And that in Acts 2, the comforter fell on 3,000 souls at Jerusalem, and thus began the spread, or the collapse, if you will, as Paul Johnson, the historian of Christianity, and many other history books that he wrote. He wrote a great book called The History of Christianity. He basically traces the beginning of God working into the world in a more material kind of way than just with the law, as was during the time of the Old Testament. He traces that, and I believe theologically this does align with Christianity. And by the way, Paul Johnson, I believe, was also Catholic, if I remember correctly. Aligns with the idea, or not aligns, but it matches with the idea that God is in the world and God cares about the world, and that the triune God, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, are all engaged with, or have been engaged with, creation, and will continue to be engaged with creation all the way to the end of the world, which may or may not, depending upon your perspective, be described in the book of Revelation, a really wild book at the end of the Bible.
Real wild.
Oh,
would not recommend. Start at the beginning.
Begin with Genesis.
Don't start at the end.
Don't start at the end. So Christian eschatology, not Christian eschatology, Christian theology is built around the concept of a triune God that exists not only in spirit, but also in body and throughout creation, all at the same time, all operating equally and all being equally God. I believe I've covered everything in there. And Lewis, well, it was a lot there. And Lewis, 10,000 foot review. I believe I've covered everything in the 10,000 foot review. And so Lewis covers a lot of that in book 4 with chapter titles such as Counting the Cost, Let's Pretend, Two Notes, The New Men, but also in Making and Begetting, which is one of his seminal chapters coming out of this book. And he says this, and this is specifically about theology. Now, theology is like the map. Merely learning and thinking about Christian doctrines, if you stop there, is less real and less exciting than the sort of thing my friend has got in the desert. Doctrines are not God. They are only kind of a map. But that map is based on the experience of hundreds of people who really were in touch with God. Experiences compared with which any thrills or pious feelings you and I are likely to get on our own are very elementary and very confused. And secondly, if you want to get a little further, you must use the map. You see, what happened to that man in the desert may have been real. It was certainly exciting, but nothing comes of it. It leads nowhere. There is nothing to do about it. In fact, that is just why a vague religion, all about feeling God in nature and so on, is attractive. It is all thrills and no work, like watching waves from the beach. But you will not get to Newfoundland by studying the Atlantic that way. And you will not get eternal life by simply feeling the presence of God in flowers or in music. Neither will you get anywhere by looking at maps without going to sea. Nor will you be very safe if you go to sea without a map. In other words, theology is practical, especially now. In the old days, when there was less education and discussion, perhaps it was possible to get on with a very few simple ideas about God, but it is not so now. Everyone reads, everyone hears things discussed. Consequently, if you do not listen to theology, that will not mean that you have no idea about God. It will mean that you have a lot of wrong ones, bad, muddled, out-of-date ideas. For a great many of the ideas about God which are trotted out as novelties today are simply the ones which real theologians tried centuries ago and rejected. To believe in the popular religion of modern England is retrogression, like believing the earth is flat. For when you get down to it, is not the popular idea of Christianity simply this, that Jesus Christ was a great moral teacher, and that if we only took his advice, we might be able to establish a better social order and avoid another war? Now, mind you, that is quite true, but it tells you much less than the whole truth about Christianity, and it has no practical importance at all. By the way, I recently had a discussion with somebody who had muddled theology, and not in reading, because I knew this before Lewis, but in listening to what they were talking about, it occurred to me, oh my gosh, everything that this person is talking about comes out of Gnostic heresies, and they don't even know that term. All things old become new again. Was it that book, that hoary book Ecclesiastes, and that hoary old thing, the Old Testament? A hoary old Testament. Yeah. There is no new thing under the sun.
Right.
Okay, a couple of other areas I would like to cover. I know we're short on time here. I'm going to cut out a whole section about American theology because we already kind of covered that. Although I will say this, I will make one point about this. COVID-19 was a seismic event for the American church. It was a seismic moment where the American church could have really established itself as a unified church, and it missed the moment dramatically. And I think that's why folks like yourself, folks 10 years younger than me, are struggling to find churches now, because COVID-19 exposed that for people who are like half a generation younger than me in like real ways. and people a full generation younger than me, the Gen Zers, are in total confusion, total theological confusion. And that can be fully laid at the feet of pastors and denominations, not theology, but pastors and denominations in the American Christian church. Why do we struggle with the simplicity of sin? Switch to that. Let's close. Let's close out with that one. Why do we? I mean, so the perfect penitent, right? That whole entire chapter which is on sin, right? And he points out in that chapter that a couple of different things. So Lewis talks about going into the three parts of morality and trying to figure all that out. And he talks about repentance, and he talks about, sort of what a penitential sort of posture is towards Jesus and the New Testament. And he says this in my book. It says this: the central Christian belief is that Christ's death has somehow put us right with God and given us a fresh start. Theories as to how it did this are another matter. A good many different theories have been held as to how it works. What all Christians agree on is that it does work. Okay. How do you even have that conversation with people who don't even believe in sin in the first place? Or when you give it to them, I'll put this to you because I've done this before. When you give it to them as an explanation for why things are upside down, they look at you like that's too simple. The simplicity of that explanation underwhelms, to say the least.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts.
Yes.
I have lots of thoughts. I don't know if any of them are good or credible or whatever, but I had a couple flashes. Yes, the simplicity of sin, but simplicity of sin still presupposes, that's the word, an actual true moral right and wrong. So I think it goes back to the point we made a lot earlier, is that we're drowning in moral relativism. And so that's why I think the simplicity of sin can boggle the mind, because with moral relativism, we're so consumed with the question why, and trying to answer it in all sort of very complicated ways. And it's not that the pursuit of the answer to that question has not led to some very useful discoveries of information, right? Because I feel like it helps us understand the brain better. And there's been like psychologies and all that. I think that's been very helpful. But when you steep yourself in all of that, because it is very intricate, and it's like you're taking apart a person and trying to analyze and dissect, even mentally, just the brain. There's so much going on. It's very complicated. Then, of course, when you say, well, this is what underpins all of this chaos, they're just like, well, but no. That's my perspective anyway. But then, yeah, that it just the big disconnect is the we just believe in a strict moral right and wrong, and the pursuit of the answer away from that, I think, has just
is the pursuit of the answer away from that. I could hear this being asked, so I'm just going to ask it. Is the pursuit away from that simplicity sinful in and of itself, or is that just merely deception?
I think that the pursuit is obfuscating the simplicity is the work of the enemy. But the pursuit in and of itself, I think, because it's a pursuit of knowledge and truth, even if it's predicated on a bad supposition, the pursuit of knowledge and truth is always a good thing. Because I think that's what God has instilled in our souls and our nature. And so, yes, that's my answer.
Okay.
I don't think the pursuit itself is bad, but I think that things have gotten cloudy and confusing. Like I think there's a verse. I don't know what it is, but I think there's a verse like the enemy is the source of confusion.
Yep.
And so just that's happening from that pursuit. Totally, that makes sense to me.
So the ability to make that distinction, do you need this is going to be an atheist. This is an atheist Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins question. So here we go. Just prefacing it. So you know the pool this bubbles up out of. Do you really need the belief in a triune God in order to make these moral distinctions?
This might be heresy. I don't know. I'm not an apologetic. It's apologetic person. Apologist.
Apologist.
I was like, what is the word? I'm not an apologist, but my brain goes back to your average medieval peasant who was going to mass every morning before they got to fields. They went to mass, they went to work, they went to sleep. They went to mass, they went to work, they went to sleep. They're probably, if they knew about the triune God, they weren't spending a lot of time contemplating it or figuring out what it meant to believe that, but they were still doing their best to be a good Christian as they were taught the Bible said.
Yeah.
So that being said, with the information now, especially in American theology and American church, the triune God there, that's really in your face. We talk about that a lot. So for us, the answer might be different, maybe. But for someone who is just, but I don't want to say necessarily a normal person, but like someone who's not feeling like they need to contemplate these things, I think the answer might be no. But I think C.S. Lewis gets into this where it's like some of these intricacies of the theology. That the answer, as much as we don't believe in moral relativism, that God always meets everybody where they are. Right? And so if grappling with a triune God is breaking your brain, don't worry about it. Just be like, okay, this is what we believe. I'm going to go do the thing that Jesus told me to do, which is, love everyone, love your enemy as yourself. Love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor as yourself. And actually love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Upon these two things hang all the law and all the prophets.
There you go. That's just like, if that's all you know, do that.
Right. Okay, now.
And maybe for those of atheists would see that as a failing. I don't know, but it's one of the.
Remember, I slammed them all as fools. They've all left the chat. They're not listening anymore.
Yeah.
I dismissed them. It's fine. No, well, but I think so. I think the seduction of. I think of the parable of the sower, right? In Matthew, right? So, Jesus is a good rabbi, told his disciples the parable of the sower, right? Seed that fell on good ground, seed that fell on rocky ground, and then seed that fell on ground that was full of thorns and thistles, right? And the seed that fell on rocky ground was unable to get roots deep enough, and when wind, rain, weather, whatever came along, it came up and it didn't last, right? thorns and thistles, obviously the seed gets choked out, right? Very much an agricultural metaphor. And of course, then the seed that falls on good ground produces, 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold, to the glory of the farmer, and the harvest. Okay. And when the disciples heard this, when they were standing among the people, they later on then came back and they were like, what are you even talking about? Right. And yeah, they were fishermen, but they also lived in a very agricultural world. And so they knew what seed was on ground. And of course, Jesus says to them, I'm going to speak to the people in parables, but to you it is given the mysteries. I'm going to give you the mysteries to sort of understand this. And here's the interpretation of the parable. And of course, Jesus says that the seed that falls on rocky ground is the seed that basically is the seed, that the word that falls on ground that does not sustain the believer, right? And so the things of this world come along and scorch it out or take it out or whatever, right? Because the roots weren't deep. Like they didn't go into the word, or they didn't go into the conversation we're having now. They didn't go into the theology, whatever. Then, there's the seed that falls on thistles. And that's the seed that gets choked out by the cares of the world, right? Your bills and the kid's dentist appointment and
cruelty, the world cruelty.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you have the seed that falls on good ground, right? And the good ground, of course, is ground that gets watered, it gets cultivated, and then it produces. And in some folks, it produces a lot. A lot of people get influenced. Some influences a little, and then others, it influences a huge number. Okay. Now, when most American Christians hear that, they think about the word being something that they have to go out and harvest and spread around, right? And that the unbelievers will be the ground that the word falls on. And while I do hold to that as one potential interpretation, I also hold to an idea, and this is something, the reason why I brought this up is it relates directly to what you were talking about holding on to just like one thing without holding on to the triune God. We don't even think about ourselves as ground as believers and what we can hold on to. Mm-hmm. And so we as ground as believers, are we being choked out by the cares of this world? Are we being blasted away by nonsense, and our roots didn't go that deep because like we spent however many years avoiding actually reading the Bible, and then finally towards the middle or the end of our lives we finally started reading it, but it never really landed for us, or it didn't really land as deep, and so we're going to struggle and we're going to try to get those roots deep, but they're only going to eventually, it's going to hit a bedrock, and we can sense when that's going to happen. And then of course there are those of us who are consumed with the word. And I would put myself humbly in that category. I mean, I've been through the Bible. I do the Bible app. So I go through the Bible in a year, basically once every couple of years. I go through the Bible in a year, and I've been through the Bible probably 10 or 12 times already. And now I'm at the point where, okay, I got to actually like starting to write down, not scriptures, not specific one-off things, but like I have to look at the contextual Bible and relate the context of things here to the context of things there, because, Paul is talking in a particular way, but Paul was trained by Gamaliel, which means he knew the Torah and the Old Testament. So when he talks to the Corinthians, he's not talking to the Corinthians because they're Corinthians and then in Corinth. He's talking to them because he comes out of an entire Jewish tradition. That's the Hebrew roots idea. He comes out of an entire Jewish tradition. He's trying to make a new thing, but what influences that tradition? Because there's a method of argumentation that he's employing. So I got to go back and I got to write out like all the references in Esther that he uses, and then I got to go write out Esther, and then I got to right. So like I'm going down this path, right? Will that yield 30-fold or 60-fold or 100-fold? Well, I don't know. Like I only do really 3 really good things in my life. I write good, I talk good, and I kind of show up on camera good. I don't really do anything else really well. Everything else I'm fair to middling at, or I suck. So like, what did the Lord give me? Well, those are the 3 things. So, okay. Oh, and I kind of sort of think good. Maybe, kind of. Sort of, maybe. So if I'm the ground and the seed sower, and I'm the product of what falls on the ground, then I can't really worry too much about the unbelievers. I do worry about the believers that don't know about the triune God. But to your point, and this, I guess, is a long way of supporting your point, to your point, I don't know what ground they're on. I have no idea. And I think about this a lot as a person who is, weirdly enough, my wife and I have been tagged as mature Christians, but we don't feel like we're mature, like at all. Like there's no, are you kidding me? There's so much more to learn. Is the bottom is just the bottom, the abyss just keeps going down. There's no bottom here.
Turtles all the way down.
It's the turtles all the way down. That's right. And I can't even see the bottom of the turtles.
Yep.
So I don't know if you need a triune God. I would say my first instinct in answering that question, or when I think about it, when like Sam Harris poses that question, or Richard Dawkins gets frustrated and gets argued into a corner by Jordan Peterson, the first thing the first thing I think is, yeah, you do need to believe in a triune God, but that might be for those guys.
Right.
You need to believe in
Big
a triune
brains.
God. Big brains. Your big brains need to wrap around that mystery and figure that out,
right,
and come to that humbly. But to your point, maybe the medieval peasant,
the simple folk,
maybe the simple folk don't need it.
Well, and kind of, you were talking about how gone through the Bible so many times.
Yeah.
So many times. And my dad is,
and it's just now landing. It's just now landing.
For me, I'm not, well, I grew up, my dad, because that was my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Always reading the Bible. I tried to follow that example.
Yeah.
And got very quickly that I did not understand it.
Mm-hmm.
At all. That just something was missing, and I would fall asleep trying to read it. And so definitely as a young person, I just gave up.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely would put myself closer to the medieval peasant that just needs a pastor. Like, I'm doing my best to ask good questions and be discerning, but I'm the kind of person that needs someone to tell me what it means. Kind of what you're talking about, like, what's the tradition that this was written in? What's the context? Like it blew my mind when I first learned about like the rabbinic interpretation of Genesis.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, that's amazing. That makes so much more sense. But me going and reading Genesis over and over and over and over without any of that context, maybe this is wrong, but wrote off is useless. Like there's no I didn't see any point in that. It felt like a waste of time, and felt like it was just going to build a lot of frustration in me. And being the people of faith that we are, God uses that.
Yeah. Well, and that was the critique that was the critique that the Catholics had against Luther during the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, which of course accompanied the printing press. They were like, well, okay, if you give everybody, this was basically the Catholic Church's objection. If you give everybody access to the book, that's fine. I mean, the Catholic Church was even, this is what people don't know about the history of all that, even during the time of Luther, they were starting to loosen up on not only printing more books, but also allowing more of the lay people to read. But even medieval peasants couldn't read. So there was a whole other kind of problem they had to solve, right? Right. Yeah. So, but literacy was spreading, and the Catholic Church recognized that it was coming. And it wasn't really to Luther, it was mostly to Calvin and Zwingli, those two guys. But their objection was, okay, you give the Bible to everybody. Let's take it at face value. Fine, give the Bible to everybody. There's no mediator. There's no pastor, no priest. Everybody can access it, which means everyone will come up with their own interpretation. And so we will have mass chaos. And that's what the Catholic Church objected to in the Protestant Reformation. That was actually at the core of it. It really wasn't about the indulgences that was even going out. It wasn't about the Pope. It wasn't about any of that. It was about, oh my God, the utter theological confusion that we will then engage in. And the Catholic Church had no system for how to handle theological confusion.
I guess one of the reasons that I want to bring that up is if you're listening and you hear Jesan and you're like, oh, that's the ideal. Like, I want to read the Bible in a year. every year for 12 years and then start to, do all the research yourself. But if that's not where you're at, or God has put you somewhere else, or your strengths lie somewhere else, and you just need somebody to tell you what it means, that's where I'm at. And it's okay.
It's fine.
That's still the spectrum.
Yep.
And God can use it all. And again, if you're I don't know. I don't know how to give this a secular twist, but
well, and let me be very clear. If you need to be, number one, I don't think you should be reading the Bible by yourself in a room trying to bang through that. I think, and particularly now, again, with technology, I have not technology on this podcast, but with technology, you can the number of resources is unbefriggin' leavable, even between like the time I was a kid to now. It's unbelievable, the explosion, the number of videos you can watch, the number of resources you can access, the number of people who are explaining the Bible on YouTube. Now, are they all, to the Catholic Church's objection?
Be careful.
Right. Do they all have solid theology?
Or even accurate information?
Or accurate information? Check the resources, check the references. Good God, you don't even believe the Wikipedia entries that you may read to talk to on just like the Trinity. Don't even believe those. Look at the resources and then go. Anyway, whatever. If you don't want to do the research, there's plenty of resources out here. The problem is not information.
No.
The problem is community.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, yes, Christen may want someone to explain it to her and give her an interpretation. And here's the other thing I suspect you probably want, even though you didn't say it. I suspect you want somebody wherein you have enough of a relationship with them, so when they give you the interpretation, you can have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
And test that with them.
Right.
Versus the idea that sometimes Catholics have about Protestants or about various Protestant denominations, that we all just sit in a room reading our Bibles and then we all just sort of like float off like atoms, figuring it out for ourselves. No. We're in community and we're yelling at each other and we're like fighting and we're intramural fights. We're having intramural fights in denominations. The Methodists would like to enter the chat recently. I mean, they're the most recent one. Like we're having those intramural battles because we're in community with each other, and in a community. And this is something for those of you who may be a little bit younger than me who are listening to this show, if you've made it this far, and if you have, congratulations. You have to be in community with other people to understand, I believe, Christian things. Yes. Because Christ was in community with his disciples, and he came out of it. Yes, and he stayed in that community. And he stayed in that community. That's correct.
So that is one of my big issues, and one of the reasons I was like, all right. Yep. This doesn't make sense. Is the constant splitting? Splitting. You have to stay in community. If you disagree, stay. Iron sharpens iron. Like have good faith discussions, and above all else, stay in love.
Right. Well, having a disagreement with somebody is not a salvation issue.
No.
Disagreeing is not sin.
Right.
Now, the motives underneath that might be sinful. The consequences in how you react or respond, that might be sinful. But the disagreement in and of itself, the confrontation in and of itself, is not a sinful act. And I think there's, along with all the rest of the moral and theological confusion, we've got even larger problem, which feeds downstream from theology into societal confusion about how to handle differences and all that. And so it's just easier to go off and be individualized and atomized, but the devil can pick you off. Christen said the enemy. I'm going to say the devil. The devil can pick you off individually. The devil can pick you off individually. I'm going to name the oppressor. I'm going to name the enemy. Absolutely. I'm going to go old school Baptist here in a minute. Old school Baptist preacher, Southern Baptist preacher, preaching a hot gospel. And so you need to be in community. I would recommend being in community. So yes, read your Bible, and read your Bible in community with others, and get in groups. As far as the role of tradition or rites or creeds, that is a whole, I had a whole conversation with my wife about this weekend. That's a whole other intramural thing. I'm going to leave that aside, but just know
That's
that
a whole other animal.
Whole other animal. And know that, not but, and know that creeds exist. I think fundamentally, something that Christen said actually clicked this together in my head literally just now. I'm thinking on the fly with this. But creeds exist so that people can have an anchor if the book is too complicated. That's one of the reasons why creeds exist. And if you're in a non-denominational church, you're probably going to struggle with that because non-denominational churches tend to be allergic to creeds. However, more Reformed churches, whether they're Reformed Baptist, Reformed Presbyterian, Reformed Methodist, and Catholic churches, tend to focus on and tend to be anchored by creeds. And that could be an incredible struggle for people who are individualistic and don't want to be anchored to anything other than even don't even really want to be anchored to the book, but other than the book. What's
so interesting that there's I don't know if I could find it fast enough because I know we need to wrap up.
Yes.
It's right here. It's because it's like the very end of the book.
Yeah.
Is if there's a concern of being worried about anchored to creeds because due to individualism, I've known this quote. I don't remember when I've known this quote for so long. I don't remember when I first heard it. But it's how monotonously alike all the great tyrants and conquerors have been, how gloriously different are the saints. So even anchoring yourself into a creed and into Christianity, it doesn't make you a cookie cutter. It almost makes you more brilliant, not almost, it makes you more brilliantly individual than anything else. I think just full stop.
I think that's a good place for us to stop. I want to thank Christen Horne for coming on the show today. This was radically different than any of the other conversations that we have had with her, but it was great. and so I would like to wish you all a happy holiday and a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from all of us here at the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. So with that, well, we're out.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.